Hello and welcome to this short training course from BlenderCookie.com. My name is Kent Trammell, and I want to continue with the autumn/Halloween theme since it's October and show you how to create a fun and stylized haunted tree. This includes modeling with the skin modifier, multi-res sculpting, photo-sourced texture painting, and cycles material creation. Now, before we get started in Blender, I want to go ahead and take a look at some photo reference. And even though the look that I'm going for is stylized and not photorealistic, I still want to reference real-life trees so that I'm guided in the right direction right from the beginning. So here in this image, this is generally the type of tree that I'm going for, with a big thick trunk at the base, with very thick limbs, maybe 3 or 4 different limbs. And also we'll be using this hole characteristic that's common in trees to give us the mouth and eyes of our scary haunted face. In the next image, we have some limbs, and this is the kind of limb structure that I want to recreate. Perhaps not so many, but what I like is that they're completely barren of leaves, and each limb is very clearly defined and gnarly, which I think adds to the scary type feel. And the next image gives us a nice silhouette of the same type of branches and limbs. And then the next image, what I like about it specifically is, for one, the branch structure up here. I like how gnarled this is, but more importantly, I like the base because we can see a defined flow of bark growth that almost borders on twisting around the tree. So I'm going to take that effect and exaggerate it a bit for our haunted tree. And then I believe I have one more image. Yeah, and this is of a root structure at the base of a tree. And I'm probably going to go somewhere in between this image and this one, where this one doesn't have a lot of roots showing above ground, which will certainly make my life easier. But if we show the roots, that can add some additional character to our tree. All right, so I will move my reference off to my other screen and jump into Blender, where I will be using the skin modifier because it is the perfect tool for creating a tree-like structure. So whenever I'm using this tool, I basically want to start out with a single vertex, or at least that's how I like to start it out. So I will add a mesh plane because it's the first mesh object in the list, tab into edit mode, Alt-M, merge all of my vertices at the center. Now I've got my single vertex. Then I'll jump over to the modifiers panel and add the skin modifier. We'll see that it generates a cube mesh around my vertex, and as we extrude, we continue to get an automatically generated mesh volume around my verts and edges. But to make this a little bit easier on me, what I don't want in this case is, let's see, if I add another vertex with Control R and cut in between these other two verts, if I move this new one off to the side, we can see that the skin modifier generates linearly around our mesh structure. Whereas I would like it to be a little bit more like a Bezier curve, so that the mesh structure would be interpolated between the verts. So I can achieve this by adding a subdivision surface modifier and then placing it above the skin modifier. Now I'm at a level of 1, and we can change that to 2 or whatever we want, but I want to leave it at a level of 1. And now you can see that the generated mesh structure from the skin modifier is curved, not angular like our input mesh. Okay, so I'll go ahead and move that vert back into an appropriate position. And the last modifier I want to add for now is another subsurface on top of my other mods. That way I get a smoothed capsule-like mesh structure instead of the square angular one. All right, so let's continue with our trunk structure, which is what this is. And by moving my verts off to the right, I want to give this tree a substantial lean off to one side. And then by Control right clicking, I can extrude new verts, give it a little kink here, and continue it up about like that. And hopefully you can see that it's so easy to create this tubular structure simply by extruding verts one by one, and then we can continue this with the limbs. And I'm basically drawing my tree very quickly. But let's undo those, because before I start creating the limbs, I want to go ahead and define an appropriate diameter for this trunk. And the way we can do that is by selecting this base vertex, and the skin modifier recognizes the hotkey Control A to either enlarge or shrink the diameter of each vertex. But it also obeys the proportional editing when using Control A. So let's turn that on, go to Connected Proportional Editing, hit Control A and start to move my mouse. Also spin my mouse wheel down to enlarge the fall off region. And now I can enlarge the entire trunk to be sized appropriately. Okay, I think that's pretty good. Now at the base, because I'm using a subsurface modifier before the skin modifier, the mesh structure is being interpolated between my verts. So we can see that it doesn't reach all the way down to this bottom vert. So let's move this guy, turn off proportional editing with Alt-O. Well, turn off connected proportional editing with Alt-O. And then move this vert below the grid. And I just want to make this tree look like it's sitting on the grid floor. So Control A just on this vertex alone. And let's see, to get it properly oriented with the floor, I'll go ahead and add another vertex with Control R and move this guy to be straight up and down with the bottom vertex. And there we go. It's starting to be flat on the ground. Let's see, I probably didn't need to add a new vert. So let's go ahead and get rid of this other one, dissolve vertices. And I'm getting, let's see, some edge loops really close to one another, so maybe I can dissolve this vertex as well, which actually got rid of the skin modifier or the generated mesh somehow. Let's see here, maybe I don't have a root. Yeah, I don't see one. With the skin modifier, one vertex needs to be defined as the root, and I don't think that's happening right now. So with the base selected, I'll choose Mark Root in the skin modifier settings, and yeah, there we go, our generated mesh comes back. And yeah, I think that's going to be a little bit better as far as topology is concerned. Now, how about some limbs? We're ready to add those. And I'll cut a new vertex in between these two verts here. So Control R, cut that one in. And then in this third vertex in the chain, I'll start to extrude a branch out. And now I want to kind of forget about the orthographic view to randomize these limbs so that they're not only being extruded in one axis and therefore making the tree flat. I want to keep it very three-dimensional. So let's start to move these points, Z to go into wireframe, start to move these points around. Also, let's scale the diameter of each vertex, turning on proportional editing with Alt-O, Control A to scale down, mouse wheel to decrease the influence, try and concentrate on this limb itself. There we go. I think that looks all right. Continue extruding this out. And when I extrude, keep in mind that the extrusions are based on the angle of view of my camera. So since I'm off at an angle and not facing the tree directly, we'll start to extrude in that direction. And that just helps to randomize and three-dimensionalize our tree limbs. So this can be quite a fun process of creating these limbs very artistically and just drawing them, and they are generated with good topology. So proportional editing on again, and let's scale the diameter of this branch. And at this point, I should say that whenever I generate a tree, typically I think of it in about 3 different stages. So first is the trunk, which is the largest tubular structure. And then next we'll do the major branches, which would be this one. And then we go to the minor branches. So we just, in layers, create the tree structure. And these minor branches are the last layer. So I'll create more of those by extruding out, like we've been doing this whole time. Just trying to give it some character. And once again, scale down the diameter. There we go, that's looking pretty good. Perhaps I'll continue extruding this guy out. And maybe I'll push this entire limb back towards the trunk. Yeah, I like that. Now let's cut another vertex in here and extrude one more minor branch. Scale that whole limb down. There we go. That's not too bad. That looks pretty tree-like. And then if I want to reposition any of these limbs, it can be quite a lot of fun, actually, to use proportional editing to modify the shape of our tree limbs. And this just gives a very artistic feel to the limb manipulation. And as far as the trunk, which is very linear in the direction that it's facing, we can add some twist to that. Let's see, by turning on proportional editing, let's see, just the enable option, so not the connected option. Turning on enabled, and then using the 3D cursor as our pivot point, and selecting this vertex up here, the end of our trunk. Hit RZ to begin kind of offsetting and twisting this tree around. So something like that could be a lot of fun. And then I'll select all my mesh components and rotate in the Z direction to kind of offset that tree a little bit. There we go. I like the way that feels. And now I'll do the exact same process to create another one of these limbs on the other side of this tree. Alright, so the last thing I want to address with the skin modifier are the roots at the base of the trunk. Now the trick here is we'll be extruding several branches from the same vertex, and this can get a little bit funky with the skin modifier. So the way that I've had the most success is by duplicating this vertex at the base, moving it off into the X direction, which will eventually be a root, and then duplicate that point to be another root. Select both of them, duplicate, and rotate in the Z direction 90 degrees so that we have 4 roots in each direction. And now I'll start to fill from the base vertex to these duplicated vertices. There we go. Our geometry is solid. There's no holes yet, at least. And let's go ahead and make this original base vertex the only root, because you can't have multiple roots with the skin modifier. And then let's see, I'll reset our 3D cursor to the origin, change the pivot point to 3D cursor. Now select all of these root vertices, extrude one more time, and scale out. Let's see, turning off proportional editing, let's scale outwards. There we go. Also scale them down, or scale their diameter down with Control A. Make them very small. Likewise with these points in the middle, Control A. And if we go too far, you can start to see some of those errors and glitchiness that we get in the skin modifier. I'm not exactly sure why this happens, but it can get really funky really quick. So let's try moving this vertex up and out of the way, and that seems to help it. There we go, about like that. How about we scale the diameter of this base vertex? Yeah, that's not too bad. But perhaps I did go a little bit too skinny with these points. Okay, now let's try moving them around and extruding additional vertices to get a bit more character into the roots. So with the move tool, I hit Shift Z, so it moves in all directions except Z. And I'll go to the top view with 7 and 5, top orthographic, and extrude out a couple other points to make the root a little bit more unique, not so symmetrical. Let's continue this around with these others, keeping some small and some large. Yeah, I think that looks pretty good. Let's see, I'll move it up to be level with the grid floor, or the grid floor is actually cutting the roots in half. And this looks a little bit weird, but when we actually put this tree on a ground plane, which I will test real quick with Shift A, Mesh Plane, scale this up, this is all we'll actually be seeing of the roots. So that looks pretty natural. That looks pretty good like that. Let's see, I can maybe give a little bit more character to this vertex, or this root over here. Yeah, about like that. Okay, cool. Yeah, so there we have some roots that I think help to make this tree a little bit more scary, because the roots are, I don't know, sort of like octopus tentacles, which I like. Okay, so this means we are essentially done with the skin modifier, and we're ready to apply it. So I will first Control S, save this version of the scene, and then Shift Control S, hit the plus button to save it as a new file. So if I need to go back to the skin modifier, I haven't lost that data. But at this point, I'm going to select my mesh in object mode and hit Alt-C and convert to mesh. This will apply all of my modifiers exactly how they appeared in the viewport, which gives us a good mesh that we can now go into sculpting mode with a multi-res modifier, or make some polygon tweaks, which is what I want to do right now real quick. And that includes extruding some shards up here to represent the fact that the trunk of the tree has been broken off at this point. So I'll select a polygon face. Let's do these two and extrude. Move them upward, scale them down. There we go. That's one shard of a broken tree trunk. Let's extrude this one, do the same thing. Offset them, rotate them around just to make it a little bit more random. Do the same thing on this other side. There we go. That looks like a broken tree trunk of sorts up there. And the last thing to do is cut out some holes for the eyes and the mouth to make our scary face. So let's see, I'll go in here and first let's delete a few edge loops because it's a little bit too dense in that area. X, delete edge loop, do it one more time. Then slide this edge loop a little bit more in between the loops on either side with G, hitting that twice, goes into edge slide mode. There we go, that's a little bit more even topology. And let's see, to create this face, I will select these two mesh faces and hit I for the inset tool. About like that. Then select the two interfaces, extrude inwards, and then extrude one more time. And in wireframe mode, I'll scale those up slightly and then delete those two faces. That way we have a contour that looks like this. Adding that little lip in the inside of the trunk will prevent us from seeing that the polygon just ends flat and there's no interior faces. So that looks good. Maybe cut an edge loop in there and Alt-S to kind of push those verts out a little bit. And do the same thing over here. Inset first, extrude in, extrude and scale out slightly. Delete those faces. Cut a new edge loop, Alt-S, scale those in. So we've got some eyes. And now for a mouth, I will do essentially the same thing. Inset first. And actually, I will slide these edge loops a little bit closer to make it an elongated mouth in that scream style. Extrude in. E to extrude one more time, scale that out. Delete those faces, cut another edge loop, and Alt-S to scale those out. That should give me enough geometry to create a creepy, haunted face in our tree trunk. And that's going to be it for the base mesh. Now we're ready to start adding some sculpting detail.